if you look at, for example, the aviation industry or the road transportation industry, the shipping industry, none of those industries could really operate efficiently without servicing and maintenance of the assets they had. And the space industry doesn't have that. The space industry is essentially launch, operate, and forget kind of approach. The side effect of that is that the environment is not sustainable. And that's what we see.
Welcome to Rockets and Radars, where we share honest conversations with Europe's boldest space and defense founders. I'm your host, Martin, and today's episode is just special. We are sitting down with Luc Piguet, CEO of ClearSpace, a company that's about to make European history by launching the first ever mission to capture and remove a satellite from orbit. What started as a research project at EPFL has evolved into one of Europe's most promising space companies. Luc and his team didn't just dream about cleaning up space, they convinced ESA to trust them with an €86 million mission to actually do it. That's the kind of audacious thinking we love to explore on this show. In this episode, Luc takes us behind the scenes of building ClearSpace, from the early days of grants and skeptical investors to winning Europe's most ambitious space mission. Whether you are a founder or just a passionate about space, you're about to hear invaluable insights about scaling a space tech company in Europe. Hope you will enjoy this conversation.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are
For the
hard.
listeners, if you have any drink to grab, either it's coffee or beer or wine, feel free to do that. This is going to be a very nice pub conversation. Welcome to Rockets and Radars. I'm very thankful to have you here. We will try to make this a chat so the founders listening can take specific insights from this so they can actually implement it in their own businesses. But before we actually start, for those who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick overview of what ClearSpace does in the space industry?
Yeah, so we set out to introduce servicing into the space industry or to the space environment. Everybody knows that the number of space debris is growing rapidly. And this, from our perspective, is just a side effect of an industry that doesn't have servicing implemented. So if you look at, for example, the aviation industry or the road transportation industry, the shipping industry, none of those industries could really operate efficiently without servicing and maintenance of the assets they had. And the space industry doesn't have that. The space industry is essentially launch, operate, and forget kind of approach. The side effect of that is that the environment is not sustainable. And that's what we see. And we came out of the problem of space debris when we started. But then we realized it's basically a building block missing in this industry. So that's what we went out to build. And the first missions we work on are actually space debris missions, where you have to pick up a failed satellite or an old satellite that doesn't operate anymore and remove it from orbit. We believe that creating the technological breakthrough that makes that possible completely changes the way tomorrow we can operate in space.
What I'm very fascinated about that, there is no one else, especially in Europe, that has tackled this problem. Why do you think nobody has tapped into this yet?
I think people have looked into it. Any great idea, you can be sure that everybody already thought about it, or a large number of people thought about it. And I think a lot of it is about execution. A lot of people say that, right? That the hard part is to actually make it come real. We're not the only ones really working on the subject. If you take, for example, a company like The Orbit, they've been working on the question as well, initially from a different angle, but we kind of converging to the same type of solution. You've got Aspirations, obviously, in Japan, that's been working on this problem from actually substantially before we created ClearSpace, right? So there's more people working on it. The big concern I think most people had is whether it's possible to make a use case that is financially viable and if there's a potential market for it, right? And I think this was mostly the drawback and what held a lot of people back to investing more into this kind of capabilities.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Most of the VCs, they ask why now? The opportunity is right? And I think you got the timing right.
Yeah, so I think the main issue is that it's for most people think in terms of close possible, right? This means I know how to do this now. The next possible thing I can do that is better is this, right? And then the next possible is this, because you're in a position where it's pretty easy to see what's the next improvement you can make. But it's a very different kind of mindset to look at an environment and thinking, what is missing, right? What is missing? And if we could use that, what would the impact be? And if you look at what SpaceX did with the Falcon 9, that's exactly the thinking, right? And it was the kind of thinking where you say, okay, the materials are so much cheaper than the finished launch cost that there's definitely a huge margin there where we can make a change. If we can bring down the cost of access to space to about this event level, what would be the impact? What will it make possible? And the thinking was even further than that initially, was really, how do we get to Mars? Can we go to Mars? Everybody would say it's impossible. Nobody would ever pay for that. There's not going to be any budget, too expensive, whatever. There's a lot of excuses why something is not possible. The question is, what's needed? What do you need to do? What do you need to achieve to make it possible? And I think when you look at a problem like space debris, you can focus on the tragedy of the commons, that nobody's ever going to pay for that. The policies are not there. Technology is still very expensive. It's too complex, too expensive to make it real. And if you approach it like this, and that's what most large companies do, right? It's really hard to create a breakthrough because you have to invest into something that is fundamentally crazy at the beginning. And that's what actually investors told us when we started out of the gate. They said, your biggest chance are large constellation, but they're very likely going to all go bankrupt. And there's no policies. There's no reason why anybody should clean it up. There's a lot of space in space. So why would we invest into this, right? So I think it's a question of how you look at the problem and the opportunity and the pain points that are coming up, right? And here we are in a situation where the pain point is rapidly growing, right? It's a rapidly growing pain point in an industry that's got a very big growth potential, and that's really what drove us.
When you mentioned the policies, well, it is going to come, and it is going to come closer than we think from now on. Right now, the issue is real, and now policymakers start to talk about it as a
it's actually,
which is
today it's easy to say, right? In 2017, when we were thinking about creating ClearSpace, it was much harder to say. And in 2013, when Astroscale started their startup, it was even further away, right? Astroscale is being very bold very early. Yeah, they were really good at fundraising. They raised a lot of funds, right? They took the problem very early on, and it's really hard to do because you're in an environment where everybody tells you the policy is never going to change, right? When we started ClearSpace, our take was, quickly, can space policies change? And our initial conclusion was the risk is that all the military interests around space generate the status quo, right? That end up creating a situation where neither the Chinese nor the Americans nor the Russians want change, because this would mean a lot of extra costs for them for a reason. It's not in their interest, so they kind of block anything that corporates could be doing, right? So that was our thinking at the beginning. But then what happens is that most of the world is driven by public opinion, right, at the end. And then a lot of the changes, they essentially can happen very fast once you have the right context, right? And the question is, what drives context? And generally, it's slow-moving trends, right? So you've got slow-moving trends to evolve and reach to a level where suddenly the balance of power or the balance of interest changes, and their policies can change very rapidly. And I think this is what we see today. We see things changing because, yeah, exactly. It's public opinion has a lot of interest for space debris. Suddenly it becomes an important subject, right?
And on a global scale.
On a global scale. When we started, we had at some point we had discussion with sponsors, and the head of marketing would tell us, so how many clicks are you going to get, right? Who cares? Who would care? We don't clean our oceans. Why the fuck would we care about cleaning space? So who cares? And we were unable to answer, obviously, this question at the time. And when we managed to get the ClearSpace One program in the tender phase and then got the funding from MemberSpace for it, we decided to do a couple of press releases. And to our surprise, the press releases we did crashed our server because there was so much demand on it that we had to, we were just surprised. So there was so much demand, our server crashed. And then within a week, we went from page 15 of the Google search when you would type into your space to the 6 first pages were just articles about us, right? And we had articles in like 70 countries talking about the ClearSpace One mission. And ESA was super nice because they accepted the mission to be co-branded. They accepted to call the mission ClearSpace One. So it made a huge amount of noise. And since then, we realized that the public interest and the interest for the subject is enormous, right? So we were very lucky with this traction. And I talked with a journalist from the ECO in Paris, and I tell him that we were shocked to see how much interest there was around the subject. And he tells me, yeah, we were surprised too, to see how much traction the subject has. If only drinking water had as much traction, we would have solved a lot of problems already, right? So the question is, and we don't want to compete with drinking water, obviously, but the question is how much traction a specific subject has in the public opinion in general has a lot of influence in how policies are written tomorrow. And unfortunately, there's a huge amount of content in the public opinion that is just pure noise. The question is how many of those quality contents that are pushed out and that people read or consume actually make the world a better place, right? And the hope is that what we do helps doing this, and it's phenomenal to see how much traction it has. So I think policies are going to come in place, and we already see things happening that most experts we knew would say would never happen in the next 10, 15 years. And they happen today already.
I think people are very good at filtering noise from quality. And what you have created is literally a quality and clear way to communicate the future. And it really works. So that's one of the, actually you are one of the best examples in Europe of that communication and marketing is so important also in the engineering driven industry, like the space industry. But by the way, before we get into the details, I would love to get into this part more. Let's get into the very start, the initial spark of ClearSpace. Everything started in 2010 at EPFL, where your co-founder Muriel started working on deorbiting the SwissCube satellite. What do you think that sparked her initial interest in space debris removal?
So essentially, she came back from the United States. She worked for 12 years at NASA JPL before that, and came back for family reason and found a job at EPFL as system engineer. And EPFL, you have to launch this CubeSat. You've got a budget, minimal budget was, I don't know, 300K or something like this. That was 2007. And you have to put the satellite in orbit. So with about 250 students, she did that, right? And actually, some of those students left EPFL and started their startups, right? Aspirations is one example. And she launched this CubeSat on a PSLV launcher. It's an Indian launch vehicle. And it's been launched at 720 kilometer altitude, so very high for a CubeSat. You don't really choose where you're going to place it. When you launch a CubeSat, you just hitchhike. At the time, it was like this. You would just hitchhike on the launcher that launches the main payload. And on the day of the launch, she received a letter from ESA saying that the European Space Agency could not participate to the mission because the satellite was too high. At this altitude, a satellite that is past it without propulsion needs about 100 years to get back into Earth's atmosphere and clean up its orbit if she wants. And nobody realized that during the complete development of the mission. Obviously, there was some frustration about the fact that ESA could not participate in the ground segment. But then the other thing is that the team realized, oh my God, we launched too high and we didn't realize it. So the CubeSat was already on the launch vehicle, so they could not take it out, right? So it's being launched. And the same year, in February, there was this collision between the Cosmos and Iridium satellite that actually also sparked the Gravity movie, right? The two large satellites collided, it generated a huge field of debris. And what happens when you operate a satellite in space, you register it, and you get messages from the US Space Force, and the time it was the Air Force, from JSPAC, telling you every time there's a risk of collision for your satellite, right? So they would send you a message saying in 48 hours, you might have a collision with a probability of that much, with a relative velocity of that much. So it gives a set of data that it gives it again at like several times before the actual event. When you have non-propelled satellites, all you can do is pray, right? You can hope it doesn't collide. And then on the next day, you check if you still have contact, and you have contact and you're happy, right? And so they received a lot of those because the satellite was in the same orbits as the Cosmos Iridium collision. And so they received a lot of conjunction with debris from this collision. They started receiving also conjunction with live satellites, large ones. So they realized that in some cases, the Swiss Cube was actually a projectile that could put in danger large live satellites, right? And some other satellites might have had to make some maneuvers to avoid the Swiss Cube. So based on all that, the realization from the team at EPFL was maybe the end of life of our satellite is a collision. I think that would not be good. And something needed to be done about it. So this is where Maria started studying this question of space debris, because she realized this is much more prevalent than what she thought, and that the problem was much bigger, right? Mm-hmm. And so she started working on the subject a couple of years, going to conferences, talking about it, getting more intelligent on the subject, making studies. And in 2012, she decided to launch a mission out of EPFL called the Clean Space One mission, where the objective was to go pick up the Swiss Cube. And I think there were two dimensions to it. One was demonstrating that the value chain is possible, right? Bringing the technologies to the level where you can actually do that. And the other part was actually keeping her responsibility to bring back the Swiss Cube within 25 years, right? Demonstrating to ESA, no, we're too high, but we're actually removing it. I think. So it was a sense of responsibility for her. So she started working on this, and she had really hard time to find some. At the time, she already did some communication that had a lot of traction, right? And then last year, Gravity movie and so on, so they had a lot of traction. And it's also around then that Aspirations started, right? They founded in 2013, I think. And then she's been working on the subject with students and PhDs and postdocs within academia for several years, because it was really difficult to get any funding. I think the ESA member states were not interested in funding that kind of subjects, right? At the time, it was too expensive, and they didn't see the value of it. She could not find private funding either. So she had to work with what she had. And so she progressed on a relatively slow pace, right? Semester by semester with students. It was a great subject for students that do system engineering studies, right? And we met in 2017. I was coming back from Latin America, where I was expat for a while. At the time, I just did an executive in Stanford, and some of my classmates were founders in the space industry. And talking with them, I realized that the space industry was a little at in the same phase as the microcomputer industry in the 80s, right? This transition between the mainframe and the PC. And this is an incredibly interesting time to be in an industry like this. I mean, this is the moment where everything becomes possible, right? It might take time until you get to the level of maturity that we have in the M processors that we have today on Macs, for example. But this is a fundamental transition in an industry, and the space industry goes through it. So when I met her, she showed me the curve of space debris. It's an exponential. So it's like an exponentially growing industry with an exponential pain points, right? So this is really what attracted my attention. But the academia part was really essentially a lot of work has been done, a lot of trade-offs have been done during this period.
By the way, if we go back, where did you meet? Did you meet at EPFL or on one of the conferences?
Yeah, it was at EPFL. Actually, it was through a common friend. I came back from Latin America. I was expat for a Swiss company for many years. I came back to the headquarters, and I just didn't fit into the local politics. So after about a year in Switzerland, this company, I left, and I was looking for what's next, right? So what's next for me? So I talked with some friends, some people that were, my take was that either a startup or taking over management for a smaller company would be more interesting for me, because large groups politics were kind of difficult for me. I mean, painful. I didn't want to live in this. And I went to meet some friends that had their own companies and talk with them about what could be possible. When they were thinking, one of them told me, hey, give me your CV. I'll check if I see something. They called me back and said, hey, yeah, I have to present you somebody at EPFL. So that's how I met Murienne.
Nice.
And I think it was a match that worked pretty well out of the gate for several reasons. The first one is that we pretty much selfless, both of us. What I mean by that is that we don't have an ego to manage. Right? It's always easier when you don't have an ego to manage. We don't really care who takes the credit for what. And from out of the gate, we realized that maybe we're the right people right now. Maybe we're able to do it, but at some point it might be that we're not. And if we're not, then somebody else should take our jobs, right? So we made a pledge out of the gate to each other that it's not about me being a CEO. It's not about her being a CTO, whatever it is. It's about the program to be a success, right? What we do to be a success. And if we're not the right people to make it a success, then we're willing, both of us, to step down, right? And that's a commitment we took out of the gate. It takes a lot of pressure out of the equation because it's really, you can really focus on what needs to be achieved rather than what is my title, what is my role. We want to have an impact, we want to produce a change. If you imagine yourself on your deathbed and look back, right? Questions what do you want to see? And for me, it's more about the impact and about financial success. Let's put it like that. So the focus is about making a dent in the universe, like Steve Jobs would say, like making a difference, making the world a better place.
You're already doing it.
Yeah, we didn't fly yet. Right? We didn't fly yet. So
soon.
We're kind of humble about it because we did a lot of stuff right, and we were surprisingly successful at some of the things we did. There's still a long way to go until we will be satisfied with the progress we made.
But anyway, so when you met, how long it took you to actually get into the phase of creating a company and working on the business plan?
So we went straight into business model and business planning right away. I asked her a few questions about spacedebris, but really one question was key for me. What did she want to do? Did she want to make a demonstration mission, pick up the Swiss Q? Go pick up one satellite? Or did she want to clean up space? What did she want to do? And she told me, I want to clean up space, right? So it was very ambitious out of the gate. And at the time, I just told her, if you want to clean up space, you need a viable business case. You have to have a business model that works because you cannot be chasing funding for every single object you go pick up on there. So you need a business model that works. So the first thing we should do is look at business models, right? And really explore that. We agreed to meet after her workday at EPFL. She was still teaching over there. And so I would go at 6:00 in the afternoon. We'll find a room with a big whiteboard or the pizza house and draft business models. And we did that for a couple of nights. And we came to the conclusion that we might be able to do something that could work, but we had to talk with those large constellations. At the time, there was only OneWeb that was funded. So I told her maybe we should talk with OneWeb and ask them what they think about it, right? The best way to build a product is to talk with your customers. It's always like that.
And how did you approach OneWeb in this case?
Well, actually, she met them in a conference and she called me back like a week later and told me they're at EPFL next week, you're coming, right? It's being very quick. They came over to EPFL. They were traveling to Geneva because Geneva has ITU, so they had some meetings over there, and she used the opportunity to get them over to EPFL to talk about removals, right? And so there was one guy that came, and we sat together with him, and we told him, so you're going to launch 2,000 satellite, but we kind of was still 2,000. And they said, yes. And then we told them, so you're going to have failure rate? They said, yes, we'll have failure rates. It's expected. They said, what are you going to do with them? And say, well, we're going to remove everything. So that felt like it's a great practice, right? And then we told them, fine, so you need a tow truck. And they said, yes, tow trucks are good. So how much do you pay for removal? How much would you be willing to pay for removals? And at the time said, well, we don't really know because the service doesn't exist. It has to be cheap because our satellites are very cheap. And at the time we just told them, well, we think you shouldn't compare the price of the service to the price of production of your satellite. You should probably compare it to the cost of opportunity of not removing it. What does it mean, right, concretely? But obviously it's a very difficult figure to estimate, right? You don't really know the cost of opportunity, not at the time and not with the current policy environment. And which changes now substantially because the CC starts finding opportunities. So it starts being able to calculate the cost of opportunity. And we used the output of this conversation to just draft a business plan that we did. And at the time, we had some discussion with the ESA big program in Zurich. And they told us, why don't you apply? And we were thinking, we're such an unusual kind of startup. It's hard to put us in any boxes they usually rather it's startup with. Is it a good idea?
Why did you think that?
Because we needed so much funding to be able to even make a demonstration. The market was not existing. So we're building for a new market, right? It's an emerging market. It's really hard at the beginning to provide credible hypothesis behind your market, right? Because it's like demonstrate when Apple was developing the iPhone to demonstrate that a smartphone without a keyboard would be successful is really hard to do, right? Because every market study tells you that customer wants physical keyboards, right? If you start Facebook, right? Just say, how are you going to ever make money with this? Nobody's ever going to pay for that. Or search, who would pay for search? It was being free forever, right? So demonstrating that there's an effective market, that there's traction, there's going to be traction. And the difference is that it's much more expensive to build a servicing spacecraft that has to do roadside service for an object that orbits at 28,000 kilometers per hour in the void of space in microgravity without friction. Super hard. Physics is really hard. It's not like developing a server or a software, right? It's more complex than that. But it makes it, yeah, so it's not comparable. You cannot follow the usual MVP, demonstrate traction, right, of your market. You have product market fit, and then you have to operate differently because your development cycles are so long, right? It's a different approach.
So how did you convince them then to get the grant?
Well, actually, there's some grants actually that we've been rejected for a very simple reason. They said you don't need 100,000, you need 100 million. So what are you going to do with 100,000? And I would tell them, with the 100,000, I will go get the 100 million. That's what I would do. In the case of the ESA BIG, actually, we wrote the business plan, applied. Then they called us for pitching. So we went to pitch. And then they called us back and said, you're selected. Right? So they had some very good questions. They said our name, the name of the company that we pitched under was fit. So they asked us to change the name. We called it One Space Drone initially. And they said, no, that doesn't work. So that we saw through Gazillion name to try to find a domain that is free, whatever every startup founder does, right? And and when they called us, they said, so you selected, and we told them, so now what? And so now we have to sign an incubation contract. And I told to Nanya that was leading with whom do you want to sign the contract? So with your company. And we said, well, we don't have a company. And she said, well, you should better create one now then. So that's more or less how it went. So we created the company right away. We incorporated, and in January we had it set up and we're ready to go into the incubation phase.
How crucial was ESA BIG for you for the initial phases of the company?
It was essential, right? What ESA BIG did was phenomenal for us. I mean, the value for us was enormous. They really pushed us into it, right? Also a little because we're not 20 years old, neither me and Brian. So maybe we needed a little push. So they put something into it. And then it's been really phenomenal working with them on the project. They opened so many doors for us. It's being the ESA BIG program is phenomenal incubator, really. And the team in Switzerland does an incredible work. So that's been fantastic.
I'm very curious about the financial part. With ESA BIG, you got around 250,000 francs-ish. Yeah. Was it enough for you to use it for the first initial phase of building your product, or have you got other grants after that?
We had to secure more funding. Obviously, the first year I didn't have a salary, right? I managed to get some salary by doing some consulting beside through the company, so to get at least some funding in. But essentially, for a year, I almost had no salary. Lilian was still fully employed at EPFL, so it wasn't less painful for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, it required a huge amount of sacrifices, right? At the beginning, I used to live in a very comfortable apartment near the lakeside with 200 square meters in a garden, have 2 cars, and we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. I've got 4 kids, right? So we're 6. But it's good. And stayed there for 4 years and ate a lot of pasta. That's what we did. And it's a very painful exercise when you come out of a comfortable lifestyle to do that kind of sacrifice. And it's easier when you're a student, when you're young to do this than when nobody relies on you to impose that on your complete family. What was good is that they forced us to bring co-funding. So we had to go find co-funding anyway. So that's what we did. So we had families and friends at the beginning and then started to do convertibles. But fundraising has been always a very challenging exercise for several reasons. First, most of the investors don't know space, and space seems to be, a lot of people think that should be agency stuff, right? So lots of investors feel like, why should I invest into space? It seems to be very long-term, right? It's not in 5 years that you build something that you can sell quickly and for a good price. So the return on investment takes a long time. And it's hardware, right? A lot of investors like things that scale like software. The market does not demonstrate this is an emerging market. I mean, there's so many reasons why you shouldn't invest into ClearSpace at the beginning, right? But what really unlocked it is the selection by ESA on the ClearSpace One program. I think that really propelled our fundraising beyond sponsorship discussions that we had at the time.
I'm very curious, how did a young company like you manage to secure that significant contract with them, even before having any excessive capital at that point?
Bet on the future, right? The big question for a startup is your timing right? Are you addressing the right needs, and is your timing right? And can you bring a solution that can really make a difference, a substantial difference? In our case, the need is growing rapidly, no doubt, right? The solution we can build can make sense, but we need phenomenal talents for that. And then the question is whether the policies and the changing will happen in the right timing. And our bet was, as I was saying, like slow-moving trends create big changes. And our take was that the big change for launching stage is going to be in 25, 26, because large constellation will start flourishing. It will ask for more licenses, for more satellite, but the first constellation will already have debris in orbits, right? So for a launching state that takes over liabilities on those satellites, it's a real problem because the risk profile grows rapidly around these licenses, and it's a risk on the taxpayer for an industry that is making money, right? And this is the moment where they need policy. You cannot continue like this. Our take was those policy changes will happen in 25, 26. That's how they will in history. The other thing, then we thought we should take some markers on the history until then of things that we think will happen at a specific time and see if they really happen at that time, earlier or later, to find out whether our timing estimates are more or less correct. And one of them was, when will there be a first tender for the removal mission? When will that happen? And at the time when we discussed it with Moyen, we came to the conclusion that this could not happen before 23, 24, given the environment, the context, the intensity of the problem, the tension around the subjects. And we created the company in 2018 with the idea that we build a company for 2025, 2026. So this is when our product's supposed to hit the market. We have to be flight ready by then. And we started the company in January 2018, and in September we received the request for information from ESA for this tender, for the Adrios program to remove a piece of debris. At the time, our reaction was, this is way too early, right? This is way too early. We just had 2 employees in the company, 1.5, to be precise. And the question is, how could we answer to a tender like this? And at the time, our take was, if we build ClearSpace out of the gate and want to vertically integrate everything like SpaceX, we're going to need 12 to 15 years. Because there's so many engineering disciplines you have to master, really master, to be able to do that reliably, recurrently. If you look at SpaceX, it took them, 12 to 15 years to get to Falcon 9 from their foundation. Physics is hard, right? And you have to bend the laws of physics to make this thing work. Right? You have to find
and you have to break things to actually go through the iterations, and that costs a lot of money.
Exactly, it takes time, right? So we when we looked at this, it was clear for us that we could not vertically integrate out of the gate. We had to horizontally integrate like Apple with the iPhone, right? Where Apple designs the iPhone, but then Foxconn does the integration, Samsung does the panels, Sony the batteries, and so on. Each one brings its heritage of years of R&D and experience to the game. And you put that all together in a rational way that makes it work, right? So this is what we decided to do. So when we saw the tender, we thought we cannot let the train get out of the train station without hopping on it. And we could not do it alone. So we looked across the European industry, which company has the most experience in formation flight, which means 2 satellites flying together with relative navigation, right? And the company with most experience was OHB in Sweden. Because they flew a mission, their team flew a mission at the time, it was Swedish Space Corporation in 2013 called Prisma, where they had like 2 satellites, Mango and Tango, and they navigated around and made demonstrations. So we picked the phone and called them and said, hey, we have this tender from ESA. Why don't we submit it together with ClearSpace in Switzerland? We're a startup. That's what we did. That's where we're coming from. And they told us, this is amazing. We always wanted to leverage on our Prisma experience. And they told us, you're the prime. And that surprised. I thought they will fight for prime shit. But no, they said, no, we are a system integrator. We're happy to have a startup being the prime. You're the operator, right? So let's build this together. So we submitted a proposal in the RFI phase together with them. and got selected, right? We wrote it in 2 weeks and got selected. So ESA could rely on OHB Sweden's experience to say, oh, but they have a good industrial partner, right? It's a startup, but they have a good industrial partner that will help them in where they might not have maturity. And so we got selected in the shortlist. There were 6 companies. It was Airbus, Thales, SSTL, Avio, and ClearSpace, and maybe MDA. I don't remember. There were a bunch, about 6 companies. And the problem you have there is that you have to write a firm fixed price proposal in the RFP phase. And to do that, you have to know where you're going to be injected. And then you have to calculate how far you have to go to get to the object, and then make your complete design in terms of propellants that's needed on board, how big is your tank, what kind of capture system, what is capture strategy for the object, which object you're going to pick up, and so on. Do the complete design, do a few iterations. Then once you're there, you have to tender to your industrial team. And at the same time, you have to make sure you get the right team so that you get the funding. If you align the team more or less with the funding you need. For example, in Switzerland, I could not compete with RUAG at the time or Hatco Technology or CDR, which were the biggest companies in Europe for the Swiss funding. So I needed them on board. So I went to negotiate with all of them to get them on board and give them a part of the project and said, let's do it together, right? The same, we want to get Airbus in Germany for the avionics and OHB in Sweden for the propulsion system integration, assembly and testing, and for the guidance, navigation, control. So we had to build an industrial team, tender to them, they had to tender to their subcontractor, and then bring up all the prices to provide a firm fixed price to ESA. And that's been a massive amount of work. It's a huge venture to do this. So we've been working overnight and days, and so it took a long time to do that. Now, we did something a few months prior that made this possible, is that we realized very early on that one of the biggest difficulties we're going to have is to have the right set of competencies in our team, right? You need very good talents to do something like this. And we went to talk with the head of the autonomous robotics lab at ETH Zurich to ask for some student. They told us, you're never going to find your guys, because the best guys I had, they all get hired out by Apple, Google, Amazon, IBM, Microsoft, with conditions you can't imagine. Those guys are paid like ministers. They get perks like there's no tomorrow.
Okay, how did you tackle that then? How did you tackle that issue?
So we walked out of this meeting and thought we have to scout right. We had no money at the time, but we had to scout right away, right? So Muriel's been teaching for years at EPFL, so she knew all the good ones coming out at EPFL. In every year, you have like 20 students. There's a couple of superstars, five, 6 that are good, and the rest are average, right? So you pick up the superstars, right? You have to know who they are. And he knew for many years who were the superstars out of EPFL. Then because she studied so much on the subject over the past 6-7 years, she knew who wrote many papers, who did really breakthroughs and stuff. So we went through our network and went to meet all those people and told her our vision. And most of them told us, this is incredible. If you try this, I want to be part of it, right? Finally, somebody builds a service to do this, right? This is incredible. So at the time, the problem we had is we had a lot of people that wanted to join, but no money to pay that, right? So, and they had a job. Most of the good people already have a job. They cannot work for another company. So we came to the conclusion that they cannot work for another company, but they can be part of a space lovers club on the weekend, right? Everybody can. So we created our space lovers club on the weekend, made them sign an NDA, because it's like the Fight Club, you don't talk about the Fight Club. And then called this our Space Lovers Club Challenge Me, because that's all we asked them to do, to challenge us. That's it, right? To tell us where our ideas are shit. That's what we wanted. And when you do that, you realize, you find out right away who's good, because you ask all the hard questions. They're constructive in general, right? But they ask all the hard questions. The ones that are not that good, they kind of drop off very quickly. And when we did the first meeting in person, and they said, we want to do that every month. This is really cool. We love it. It's inspiring. It's refreshing to work on something like this. And when we got to receive the RFP, most of them raised hands and said, hey, maybe I can help you read this copy or give you some feedback on that. So we had a phenomenal team with a lot of experience, right, in that already did missions and so on, to review our copies that we submitted to ESA. So when we got to submit the proposal, we put on the table a phenomenal proposal. I mean, I read through it, and It doesn't happen often in my career, but that's one of those moments. I read through this proposal and I think, this is good, right? It's like, you're just proud that you can work with those guys because they're absolutely incredible, right?
You got 86 million euros in that ESA contract that you won in the end of the day, right? Through this amazing proposal.
And we actually thought that ESA will never give the contract just to a startup. We thought they're going to give it to Airbus and give a chance to the startup to see what they can do. So we thought they would select Airbus and maybe give us a shot, right? So in June, they called us and say, you're selected. And our question is, who else? Right? Say, who's the other one? They said, no, it's just you. And I remember we were the complete team at EPFL. There were like 30 seconds of silence where everybody was processing that now we have to deliver on it. And how are we going to do that? Right? It's going to be a lot of work. And
now it's just the start.
Yeah. So there was a guy from Rouen, he was sitting beside me, just put me like this and said, this is like 5 minutes of euphoria and 5 years of misery. You just hang up there. And yeah, it's been incredibly hard. It's really hard to do that. Just before we got selected, we actually reached out to some investors. We could not agree on the valuation, so they left. And at the time, we discussed it very openly with the team and our club. And the guys from the club called me and said, hey, we want to invest, right? So they all went to pull money from their families and friends, their own economies and so on, put the money in the company. So our first convertible loan raise was our first employees. They put all money into the company. So we made convertible loans with all of them.
And how much have you raised in this way?
We raised about 250,000 euros. And then we got selected and investors came back and said, okay, can we still talk? And we talked again and get them also under a convertible loan. So in total, we did some sort of a pre-seed convertible loan of about 500,000, give or take. That's what we could raise at the time.
When did you start to think beyond that on your next funding round, which was the seed round, where you raised 4 million?
We thought about that very, very quickly, that we needed that. We also worked on sponsorship because we felt a big part of what we do is communication about sustainability. We made a sponsorship agreement with Omega because we felt that there can be a lot of resonance between the values of a sponsorship partner and in the values that we're trying to build. So when it comes to sponsorship, we just thought it's going to be really, really difficult to get venture funding for what we try to do. For all the reasons that I told you before, right? It's a very hard venture to fund like this because demonstrating traction out of the gate is difficult. We thought sponsorship might be the way that allows us to make the first demonstration. And it's really a partnership where somebody says, well, I believe in this. I believe this needs to change. It's phenomenal how much support they provided in difficult times. They've been incredible. But then we started looking at the seed as we needed to demonstrate sufficient funding, post-funding for the ClearSpace 1 program. So it's an 86 million contract, but we had to bring 24. So there was some sort of contractual timeline when we had to provide how much funding, right? It's actually a little paradox at the time we felt like that because most of the big missions that large primes are doing are fully funded. And we're a startup, so we're more fragile than a large prime and we have to co-fund, right? But at the time, it was really the only way we could secure the funding from member states and give them confidence, tell them, listen, guys, we're not just here to pick money from you. We're going to do our work to find additional funding. So we're going to wet our shirt and make sure that there's enough funding behind a program like this. This has to become commercial, right? This is how we looked at it.
I'm very curious about Series A, where you raised 26 million euros.
So during the Series A, we had to do two things. We had to create a holding company in Europe. We already had entities in Switzerland, the UK, and in Germany, but we needed to have a holding company in Europe. So we decided to do that in Luxembourg, and we had to close this round, and that took several months. It takes time. It's really from the moment you've got the commitment from investors, where they say, fine, we're going to put the money in, until you really have a closed round, it's a lot of iterations and discussions and terms and then back and forth and reviewing the documents and reviewing them again and modification and side letters and so on. So that took quite some time. It's really a lot of work to close a Series A, right? And what I would recommend founders to do is to start it early, right? When you more or less project, you need to close a Series A within a year, then start then, right? Because by the time you get traction with investors, then you still have to count several months until you really close down. And it always takes more time, right? Always takes more time. The other thing is there's those moments where you have to kind of ideally create rapid traction for the decision, right? So it's sometimes better to delay discussion with some investors so that you can group multiple together and have a very intense period during which you talk with a lot of investors at the same time on a raise, because it will have much more chances of getting traction and success, because what they want to see is traction around the round, because they're much more comfortable investing into a round where there's traction, where other investors have interest, than if you contact them and then you have to build interest with another one. It takes 3, 4, 5 weeks to do that, or maybe 2 months, and by the time they cool down, right? So this dynamics of the process is important. And if I would have to redo them, I would structure the agenda, the execution more strategically to make sure that those rounds close quicker. Also more challenging to raise funds for us than maybe some other space ventures. No, it might change now. It's starting to change.
There are new initiatives and new long-term investors that are appearing, but still we are getting there. Europe is still very early in this process, I think.
Yeah, I think actually in Europe, we're able to land a super heavy booster on the characteristics. We have the engineering capability to do that. We have an ecosystem of startups. They exist, and maybe they could be more ambitious, right? But often the ambitions of founders or people that really have the talent are hampered by the funding mechanisms, right? So we would be able to do a super heavy in Europe. We would be able to do a Starlink in 4 years. We're able to do that. We have some of the best engineering in the world, right? If you look at the case, it's interesting. If you take as a comparison the Hyperloop from Elon Musk, right? Musk did this Hyperloop program for a while. Actually, the first concept I've seen from Hyperloop, I saw it in 2001 at EPFL. EPFL had a Hyperloop program that planned to connect Geneva with Zurich in 25 minutes, right? That was the plan. So they worked on Hyperloop for years, couldn't fund it. But then when Musk starts his Hyperloop program, he does a student competition. Who are the ones that win every year? So it's the Germans. The Technology University of Munich wins every year. Why? Because we have phenomenal engineering capability. So the point is not that we're lacking engineering skill and research. We have the right research, the right engineering skill. It's the operating systems we put behind the funding or space ventures that needs to change. It needs to evolve, right? The other problem is where funding availability, right? And risk, openness to risk. There's some policy dimension related to work policy. And in the US, there's much more freedom. You can make a team work, Musk make his team work 60 hours, 70 hours per week without a problem, right? If they're willing to do so, if they don't want to do that, they can work somewhere else, more or less. In Europe, it's much more regulated. So it's you can't do that, for example, in Switzerland. You can't operate the same way. Now, at the same time, it should be a fair salary for work done, right? And there should be some level of balance. But I think what's really important is that we look at the operating system we have in Europe and start being more ambitious about what we can achieve, right? And if we do that the right way, then we can produce a huge amount of breakthroughs. There will be some failures, and there's been a lot of failures in the US. There's going to be some failures, but statistically in the approach, and mostly if you have an approach where you never give up, you're just going to demonstrate progress at a rate that so far is not really seen often in Europe. But definitely the capabilities to do that, we have them in Europe, and probably more so than in the US. That's my take.
Awesome reflection. And also awesome story. I have 2 more things on you. The first thing is, where do you see ClearSpace now? And what is your hope for the next 5 to 10 years from now on? Both from the company perspective, but also from your personal perspective.
Now we are at the stage where we have to regroup and accelerate. So ClearSpace 1 is getting restarted. Now with the partnership with OHV, which simplifies dramatically our industrial team. The UK program continues. We're starting right now a life extension mission in Luxembourg. So things are really restarting. And we refocus on making as soon as possible an orbit demonstration. So we had to read build a new dynamics, review our organization, simplify, streamline what we do. And that's what we did. And that's what we're still doing. And this is where we are right now. So we close a small raise that extends our Series A, right? So we'll be in a position where we have air, we can breathe, we can operate, we can grow. Now we have to really accelerate and get into a pace that makes sense. And that's really the challenge we have in front. Now, in the next 5 to 10 years, we expect to land many more contracts to expand on our operating. We have some sort of an operating system that makes it possible at the same time to innovate on technologies, but then to have programs that run in different regions, but in a consistent way and very effectively. So we have to improve on the system and get more contracts and missions to fly. My objective is to get to a point where after the first large mission, we fly every year, and then we fly every quarter, then we fly every month, right? This is where we have to be, because this is a large market. There is a lot of needs, right? The need is substantial. And this is really the kind of dynamics we want to build, get to the point where the number of site opportunities is substantial. Right now, the missions are still 4 years to build, right? 4 or 5 years to build. We have to get to the point where we can make a mission between the time between contract signature and flight, which is much, much, much shorter, right? Get to a point where you can very rapidly move from having contract signed with the customer and then flying something. And so those are the kind of challenges we have to overcome over the coming years. I see where the industry is, where the market is, what's possible. And I mean, there's so much opportunities, right? I'm very optimistic and enthusiastic about where it is all going and what we'll be able to achieve tomorrow.
Awesome journey. Where people can follow up on you? Is it LinkedIn or is it somewhere else?
So yeah, and LinkedIn is what I most use. I mean, personally, I don't publish much because I spend most of my time just working. And maybe I should publish
that's
more.
A good answer.
I got the comms team that told me, you should publish more. I should actually publish more and share some more of what we do. Thinking of ClearSpace is probably more active than mine, right? And otherwise, we publish on Twitter and on Facebook. We should write a book about everything that we went through.
I think you should. We've been talking for an hour and I would talk for 3 more. This story would need more hours to tell, but an amazing story, and good luck on your next steps. Now, the last step of this episode is fire round of questions. I will ask you 4 questions, and if you can answer them with 1 to 2 sentences, that would be awesome. I'm very curious, what are you going to say here? What is the one thing that you wish you would known when you were starting ClearSpace?
I wished I would have known what priority the dynamic and expectations of ESA's management was at the beginning, right? That would have been incredibly helpful. There's many more things I wish I would have known, but I think this is one.
Okay, second question. What is the most surprising question during investor due diligence that you got?
It was not really a question, it was a statement. Right?
Okay.
One of the investment funds tells me, I want to see your financial projections of the future, your model, your business model, or financial business model in detail. And he tells me, I won't believe it. I won't believe it. All I want to see is your ambition. Right?
Ooh. Okay, next one. What is a one piece of contrarian advice for other European space founders, especially in the early stages? And by contrarian, I mean something that you believe that other people don't.
I believe that the spacecraft should be beautiful. I think it should be beautiful. Most of the value you produce is emotional, right? So the point is that people would tell me, engineers would tell me, yeah, but you never see the spacecraft, which is not true. It's on the web page, it's on all the communication, the press uses it all the time. It's the one thing that crystallizes the understanding of what you do, right? So design is an important dimension because this drives funding and support, right? And it drives income. So I think if you do something, you make something beautiful.
Okay, one more. What is the one thing that could help the European space industry be in a better place for the founders in terms of the environment? What is the one thing that would change?
If you want to produce dramatic change, if you want to do something that's fundamentally different, if you want to do a SpaceX pipe in Europe, you have to rebuild your standards from the ground up and understand the first principles and how you produce net benefit with every single requirement you have in your requirement. I think those are the kind of things where change is needed, to my sense, in the European space industry.
Thanks all. one more question, and then we wrap up. And the question that I have on you is to create a challenge for our listeners who are mostly early stage space founders. And their goal is going to be to take that challenge and try to implement it in their journeys of building their companies. So if I ask you in a very short form, what would be the challenge that you would recommend to founders to implement the next week until the next episode comes up?
Okay. Meet at least 4 customers per month over the next 6 months
Fair enough. Okay.
and talk with them, right? What their pains are, what their problems are, what worries them.
That's an awesome challenge. Okay, thanks a lot.
And that wraps up our conversation with Luc from ClearSpace. What an incredible journey from an EPFL research project to leading Europe's first space debris removal mission. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow Rockets and Radars on your favorite podcast platform, whether it could be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. I try to release new conversations with space and defense founders every Friday. You can also find ClearSpace on LinkedIn to follow their mission progress. As a bonus, in the description of this podcast, you can also find a link to get an intro to Luc through me, as well as all the social media links you need to know about. Next time, we'll be back with another founder who is pushing the boundaries of what's possible in space and defense and Europe. Until then, keep reaching for the stars, or in this case, for the space debris. See you next week.